Rand, I need another episode of Fully Cinematic.
In the ongoing streaming war for supremacy amongst various apps, another service has rolled out a $150 million exclusive film. So brush your teeth, throw on your PJs, lay back, and come along on a journey to Slumberland. Nima, who lives with her widowed single father Nemo in a lighthouse, spends her days learning to play the piano, chop firewood, and sail boats. One night, Nemo relays a story from his youth about a treasure hunting adventure that he had with his outlaw friend Flip. During their expedition, Nemo discovered a hole in the ocean floor from which a sea monster appeared. But the story is interrupted by a distress call on the CB radio, prompting Nemo to rush out in order to aid a fisherman in danger. During his absence, Junior awakens to find her house freezing cold, and after opening the front door, she's swept out to sea and into a whirlpool which drags her under until she sees her father's boat, the Ariel, and then Nemo himself being attacked by a giant squid. It turns out that these events took place in a nightmare, but Nima is awakened by family friend Carla, who notifies her that her father really was killed. Nima's rich uncle Philip, whom she's never met, reluctantly agrees to become her guardian, arriving on the day of the funeral in order to move her to his penthouse on the mainland. That night, Nima dreams that her stuffed animal, nicknamed Pig, comes to life, as does her bed, which walks her to the docks before jumping in and sailing both her and Pig back to the lighthouse. Once inside, Nemo meets the infamous Flip, a large man with ram horns and ears whose BO attracts flies. Flip is in search of the treasure map that Nemo referenced in his story. The following morning, Nemo resolves to find the map, but is instead enrolled in school for the first time. At school, she meets her classmate Jamal, a zombie enthusiast and environmentalist. After school, Uncle Philip, who owns a successful doorknob company and is nervous about raising the kid, attempts to bond by teaching her how to pick locks. After Pig locates the map, Nima gathers supplies before heading to school. Setting up a hammock in the basement of the school, she drifts off, only to reappear in the lighthouse where she encounters Flip again. He runs down a quick list of rules, which includes avoiding dream cops, and they embark. Just as Flip is about to be arrested by Dream Cop Officer Cindy Green, a nightmare attacks, nearly killing them. Meanwhile, Nima's awakened by Jamal, who's checking on his mushroom garden. After school, Uncle Philip surprises Nima with a small sailboat. And that night, because Nima has trouble falling asleep, Uncle Philip tells her a boring story about the doorknob business. Meeting Philip in a dream in an empty metropolis, he reveals that he hasn't woken up in a very long time and can't and doesn't want to remember who he is. The trio subsequently hitches a ride on a garbage truck, only to be pursued by Agent Green in the pea soup-colored El Camino. After making their way to the cab, they discover that the driver is a little kid covered in tats who wakes up as the truck runs off a cliff. Earlier, Flip explained that dying in one's own dream is consequence-free, but dying in someone else's is permanent. They flee the nightmare into a spacious restroom where Green catches them and reveals that Flip happens to be Slumberland's 28th most wanted fugitive, which disappoints the big musty lug to no end. She takes the group to the TVA, the Bureau of Subconscious Activities, HQ, and locks them in a cell where Flip confesses that he's searching for a hard-to-find pearl because it can help him to finally wake up. Cindy explains to Nima that the BOSA is stuck with 1970s decor and wardrobes because the majority of their budget spent on the dreams. She also recognizes that Nima's greatest fear is being alone. When she wakes up, Uncle Phil shows her home movies of himself and Nemo as boys and reveals that his nickname was none other than Flip when they dreamed together. However, he stopped dreaming after Nemo met his wife and moved away. Philip assumed that Nemo had moved on emotionally as well, forgetting all about their adventures. Nemo borrows the lockpick set before going back to the BOSA in order to spring Flip. Running into Green on the way out, Nemo freezes her with her own gun before she escapes with Pig and Flip via the elevator. Officer Cindy had insisted that Flip's sought-after pearls were a myth, but Nemo told him that he'd seen thousands at the bottom of the whirlpool. Anyway, after fleeing to a Canadian mountaintop, they escape Green by jumping on the back of a giant goose named Bob. They follow the map to the gateway to the Sea of Nightmares, which turns out to be a rickety shack in the middle of nowhere. It leads to the lighthouse dock where Nemo tells Flip who he really is. He doesn't take the news well and rejects her suggestion that he become her part-time dad. Nima's awakened by her principal, who arranges a conference with Philip, and afterwards, at home, they have their first argument, which culminates in Nima running away following Phil telling her that he hadn't asked her to live with him. This was provoked by Nima calling him boring. Anyway, the boat capsizes, catapulting Nima to the Sea of Nightmares. Meanwhile, Flip discovers a wanted poster listing him at #1, which fills him with joy. Elsewhere, Nima spots several pearls in her dad's wrecked boat as a nightmare advances on her. Flip flies through it in a stolen P-51 Mustang that he jacked from a Tuskegee airman and picks Nima up, arriving in Canadian airspace where he crashes through the shack and into a fancy restroom. Nima, Flip, a Goose Rider, and the bathroom guy all flee to the garbage truck via the glove compartment before crashing into a salsa dancer's ballroom dream. Everyone but Nima and Flip wakes up. The bathroom guy turns out to be an office worker who fell asleep at his desk. The Goose Rider had dozed off on his couch. The salsa dancer is actually a nun who blacked out in church, and the kid is just a kid in his bed. In the waking world, the Coast Guard, with Carla and Philip in tow, find Pig adrift. Flip, meanwhile, sacrifices himself to a nightmare squid so that Nima can take the pearl that they snagged to the lighthouse. Upon finding the boat, Uncle Phil dives into the drink and the nightmare evaporates just as it reaches Nima. Green then meets her at the lighthouse and advises her to squeeze Pig, who coughs up a pearl before making her exit. Nima's dad then shows up and they race to the top, where he catches up on her life since he died. Philip then swims Nima to shore, where Carla performs CPR. Nemo explains that he taught Nima so many skills in order to enrich her life and reveals that he's proud of her. He also convinces her to live, and she consequently wakes up, prompting Phil to vow to never let her go. At school, Uncle Phil invites the principal to come sailing with him and Nima, and they're both happy as Philip wishes his niece sweet dreams. Slumberland essentially amounts to an extra dumbed-down version of Inception. And Jason Momoa continues his career portraying sea-based characters. The movie's based on early 20th century comic strip Little Nemo and Slumberland by cartoonist Winsor McCay. The strip largely focused on Nemo's dream adventures with Flip, who embodied a nasty Irish stereotype and a racist stereotype in the form of an African caricature. Nemo in the movie is the grown-up title character from the strip. Aside from the extremely low entertainment value, Slumberland's pint-sized heroine also sets a pretty bad example for the kiddos. At one point, she yells at and gives orders to an adult. And don't get me started on how up it is for Flip to rob a Tuskegee airman. It's amazing that that scene was even written, much less shot and included in the final cut. Piss on this movie. If you really want to see a young girl travel to different fantasy worlds with her father figure, you're better off skipping this trash and watching Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness instead. In other news, it's time to check out a comment that we got on the previous show. After watching the House of the Dragon / The Future of the Walking Dead episode, Fresh Out the Shower said, "The last episode of The Walking Dead was intense, but not as intense as it could have been if I didn't know Negan was going to have a spinoff show." Yeah, Fresh, they dropped the ball, as usual. Shout out to Fresh Out the Shower and everybody who hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But I've had enough of this conversation, so I'm logging off.
Fully cinematic.